Hey everyone, Tactics here, and today we're going to be diving into the brand new raid Abberus, the Shadowed Crucible, specifically focusing here on the job of the tank on both normal and heroic difficulties. I'll be walking you through the first 8 bosses here, so just everything up to Sarkareth, the final boss. They'll be doing an individual video later on that guy, so be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you know when that gets posted. Also make sure that there are timestamps down below in the description so that you can just jump to the boss that you want to learn more about. But let's start at the beginning here, of course. Kazzara, who, like a lot of first bosses in raids, doesn't really have much in terms of tank stuff here. So the tank debuff here is just a simple taunt at 1 stack. It's Terror Claws, it's got an initial hit, and then it puts a decently long dot on you. Honestly, pretty tame in terms of tank debuffs go, both in terms of the initial hit and the dot, so it's not too scary. The big thing here is on normal, you can literally do whatever you want. You can tank this boss like in the middle of the room and AFK there. Perfectly fine. Honestly, that could probably work for heroic too. What you see here is we're kind of doing like a pseudo mythic strat. We're just basically practicing positioning for it, but kind of what we're doing is we're tanking the boss and we're going to be slowly moving across the room this way, and we're just going to be dropping rifts on one side of the boss. This basically lets melee have a decently high uptime, and on heroic version at least, these rifts don't go away until you kite one of the lasers into them. So these lasers are going to spawn, and then people are going to have to kite them into those rifts. So that's why we're taking this way, and we're going to slowly move as we need more space. Obviously, you know, with the things shattering, it's hard to move the boss a little bit, but basically we're just slowly moving down the hall here. Not super necessary even on heroic. You can kind of just YOLO it, you know, drop the rifts wherever and have someone kite into them. It's just a little bit more organized, more for mythic, but again, on normal, none of those matters because they will just expire on their own, so you don't need to worry about that at all, and you're really just worried about the taunting at 1 stack. Pretty simple for a first boss, honestly. Moving forward to probably the next simplest boss here in the raid is Assault of the Zaqali here. It's kind of like a couple different phases. So initially you're just fighting the boss alone. Eventually he'll start summoning adds. His tank debuff is Heavy Cudgel. It's just like a big physical frontal hit in this phase, and it becomes a fire frontal in the next phase. Just want to make sure you see like that, pointing it off into the wall. Don't point at anyone. The debuff is pretty tame. It's like a 15%, so a very small physical damage amp. So you can take multiple of this if it ever actually overlaps, but for the most part it doesn't. As you can see here, the next Heavy Cudgel, 46 seconds, this debuff, 30. So like, it's not uncommon to just have one tank take a couple in a row, especially when the boss is kind of jumping back and forth. So see here, this is the next phase. We're breaking off into sides, one tank on each side, and just tank all these adds, pick them all up, make sure you do hit them, because often if they're not being tanked, you see these guys, a lot of them will just try and run to the door. So make sure you do grab them all, hit them, and then bring them to the Mystic, because the Mystic's the highest prio while that shield is up. And basically, you're just picking up adds here. The boss will at some point jump over. I think at some point we get another Mystic spawn to see here in like 25 seconds. Another Mystic comes on our side. So we're just going to bring all the adds over to that Mystic. And probably fast forward, yeah. Mystic jumps up, there he is. Bring all the adds on top of the Mystic, making sure to pick them all up. They spawn all around you here, and I'm tanking kind of here both on purpose because the boss is also going to jump over here at some point. Again, making sure I hit all these guys, pick them all up, come back to the edge of the platform, and the boss jumps over, and again, I just bring him right to the edge. Makes it easy to aim the frontal just right off the edge, right? So pretty simple, and he gets to the last phase, and it becomes a fire cone. Everyone runs back to the center here. He's doing his thing. Big fire AoE, and then there's just this catastrophic slam soak, which like a bunch of players that right there need to get in. It's not just a tank thing, but usually it's like half the raid and then half the raid. But overall, again, a pretty low tank damage, pretty simple thing for the tank to deal with for this boss fight. As that, we have Rashok here. This is probably one of the harder tank bosses for the initial few, like 5 bosses, I'd say, just because the tank hit is actually a pretty dangerous one if you don't execute it correctly. It's pretty quick, so basically it's a 3-part combo, and he does 3 hits of one of two abilities. Yeah, so basically the 2 abilities are either a physical hit, which amps your physical damage taken by like 3000% or something. It's called Earthen Crush. And there's a fire hit, which is the same thing but for fire damage, called Flaming Slash. So basically you can't take 2 of the same type. So the tank combo is about to happen here. So the first is Flaming Slash. That's on me. So I'm going to take the flame hit, and now I'm going to have a 6-second amp of fire damage. And notice how much damage that did do to me through Ardent Defender. So that's still a pretty significant hit on its own. So it's still a relatively dangerous, definitely the hardest hitting tank boss this early in the raid, so be aware of that. Make sure you have something for this combo. But I'm fine to take this Earthen Crush here because I don't already have an Earthen Crush debuff. So now I've taken 2, and now is Flaming Slash again. So if I took this Flaming Slash, it would be 3,000 times the initial hit, right? It's a 3,000 damage increase. So that's when the taunt goes off. You can see how quick these casts are, right? 1.5-ish second casts. Very, very quick casts. You don't have a ton of time to react. So you're basically just watching here for the second of the same cast to go off because it's a random combination here of them. At least I assume it's random. I didn't notice any pattern of it being set. So just whenever you see a repeat ability, the other tank needs a taunt. As you can see here, he will switch targets mid-ability cast, so that's not a problem. It's still quick, though. It is still very quick, and it's very dangerous. If this ever gets messed up, the tank is getting one shot if you don't, like, immune it or something like that. So definitely the hardest-hitting tank boss, I think until maybe, like, Zskarn or Neltharion later on in the raid here. So this is one where your tanks really want to be on your toes. You can see he's just about to finish this combo, and there's another combo coming in 11 seconds. So he does 2 combos fairly quickly, and then there's a bit of a gap, and then he does 2 combos again. So just be aware, you really want to be quick for these taunts, and you really want to make sure that you are popping a personal for these combos, especially for the tank taking 2 hits, which again, you don't really know because of the randomness. So here it is again, Flame Slash, Earth Crush, and then I taunted, and it's another Earth Crush. So that one's a little bit different. There was 2 Earth ones that time instead of 2 Fire ones, but same deal. And it can be back-to-back initially the same one too, right? It can be Fire, Fire right off the top. So just be aware, you're going to have to taunt at some point, and you're going to have to react very, very quickly. In terms of like positioning here, the other thing to note is that when the boss gets to around 95 energy here, we can fast forward. That's when you would want to take him to the middle. So he's going to do a big old frontal here. And this Shadow Lava Burst, that's kind of your signal as like, oh yeah, we need to go to the middle now. So that's going to go off, you dodge it. And then we just drag boss to middle, and that triggers his phase. As you can see here, we tanked along one side of the room, and basically we're going to be just dropping those big fire puddles that shoot the waves behind us as we move, just to make it a little bit easier to dodge. Having to only dodge them kind of like 1 or 2 directions is ideal. But so like after that cone around 95 energy, that's when we bring him in to drain him. If he hits 100 energy, at least on heroic, he becomes like immune to that. So that's very, very bad. That's a wipe. And you're going to see here, we're going to bring him this way. We're going to turn him because we're going to start moving away from those flame things in the circle. And you see that X marker in the back over there? That's where we're going to start dropping our leaps. And we're just going to keep dropping these leaps behind us as we move along the edge of the room here. And that's kind of the positioning aspect of this boss fight. So pretty scary tank combo, and you do have some positioning things to deal with for Rashok. Anyway, so decent step up from the other earlier bosses. So we're going to take a step down now, and we're going to talk about the Amalgamation Chamber. All right, there. So off the top here, bosses are apart, and you do want to keep them apart because they will just constantly apply a stacking debuff to anyone within 50 yards here. And you don't really want this stacking up on like everyone. One's a dot, one's a health decrease. The shadow one, I believe, is a health decrease here. And so that's why I want to stay away. But you do need to swap at some point. And so how we found the best way to swap is to actually just basically only have your tanks doing a bunch of the running. And the best spot we found was around the Shadow AoE ability here, which was shortly after the Meteor. So the ability is called Coalescing Void that deals with detonation. And what you really don't want is the overlap of the bosses being near each other, because that does pulsing damage as well, to happen with that big hit as well, or the Meteor Soak on the fire side. So what you do is the Meteor Soak happens, and then just after the Meteor Soak happens, the Void Detonation happens, and then just after that, we swap the bosses. That was the best way we found anyway. So Meteor here is going to come up in 7 seconds. We're on the shadow side, so we'll be able to see it on the left side, top left of our screen here. There you go, I turn a little bit. Nice job, me. There's the Meteor going out. Here's the Coalescing Void going out. So this is going to detonate after the Meteor, and now we're going to swap. That goes off. Now we take one big hit from the ads touching, but we're so quick with it, we're good. And now our Void stacks are going to now reset here. They're going to fall off, and we're only going to be gaining these fire stacks, and it's the opposite for the other side here. And then outside of that, we're just trying to have an even DPS split like we actually do right now, so that these guys push to 50% around the same time. That's P1. So P1 there, just swap shortly after the Meteor / detonation goes off. When everyone has been topped, there's not raid damage going out. Do a quick little swap so there's one big hit of raid damage, and that's it. That's you reset your stacks. Let's fast forward a couple hits. Here is the actual boss. And this guy has another tank combo. This is 2 parts. So he does one part, which is a vulnerability, into a second part, which is a big Shadow Flame cone. And so basically, one tank, it's going to take this vulnerability here, and then usually there would be a taunt off here. I think we messed up this one, so I popped the CD for this one. But basically, what would happen here is you don't want to take the cone with this vulnerability, and so you would taunt swap mid cone cast, just like in Rashok. This boss will switch targets, so it'll go on the other tank, and then you just want to make sure, one, this cone is faced not on the raid, and two, the tank that got the vulnerability moves out of the cone. So both those things you want to make sure happens. And then the other thing in terms of positioning on this fight is we do just a little bit of ping pong essentially here. So you're going to get the conflagration soak here in about 20 seconds. So let's fast forward here. Here it is. Here's the soak. Everyone in melee kind of gets in this. You need at least 5. And then it goes into the big suck in and damage hit. And so when that happens, we just basically run to the opposite side of the room, face the boss towards that wall. And then we would do the same thing on the next ability as well. We'd run back. So we just basically ping pong back and forth across the room here. Super simple. There's the combo. Vulnerability into frontal cone, just like that. No one else is in it. He sidestepped it. Super easy. Just make sure you are, taunting at the right time. This one, again, seems much more forgiving than the Rashok one, both in terms of the damage output. As you saw, I was able to live messing up the tank combo here and still take less damage than a regular hit on Rashok. So Rashok's definitely much scarier. This one's much more forgiving, so just keep that in mind. It's not a big deal if you mess it up, but that's kind of how we handled it. Then we've got Forgotten Experiments, and this one's a really, really cool tank boss, actually. So basically, all 3 of the bosses here, they have that buff. You can see that little blue claw, and their autos apply an Infused Strike debuff here. So I have it tracked here for my co-tank, and basically what happens is this debuff doesn't expire. The only way to get rid of it is to touch another player with the debuff, and so, we taunt swap, I'm going to get a stack here, and then we touch, and it explodes. And now neither of us have any stacks. My stack's cleared, but there is this 20-second dot on the entire raid. This will stack. So basically here is the tanks, you can kind of swap at whatever number. We found 5 to 6 to kind of be the number. And then you just want to make sure that you don't ever touch each other until you're okay to clear. So until this dot is gone, then you can basically insta-touch and just kind of keep this. It's a pretty soft dot, honestly. Like, it's not very dangerous. Maybe in combination, but like you can see here, like health, it's like a little tick, it's like that was also actually the raid hit, so it's actually way less than that, so it's a little spooky. Like, health bars are barely moving, but they are kind of moving, you know what I mean? So you don't want to stack this up, but it's not like you would ever, we cannot ever clear this debuff here because there's some damage going on. It's not really something you think about in that sense. You just want to make sure you don't stack it up. So you're going to see here, right, in 8 seconds, we're going to be like, okay, let's touch again. I'm going to have a couple stacks here. At some point he's going to taunt. And we're kind of chilling, right? Like I said, 5, 6 is what we kind of found to be like a decent spot. There, he taunted there, and we're just kind of waiting because a lot of the bosses will kind of like lock themselves in abilities and prevent the stack from going off. So be aware of that. This guy, notorious with it, with his bleed and his slam here. The last boss with his deep breath, also notorious. So sometimes you'll get a tank just sitting on 6 stacks and the other tank at 0, so you can't clear. So just be aware of that. Here we have a new spawn. So be careful because these guys will just auto someone when they spawn in, like the closest person sometimes, or just a random nearby person. So melee, you can see here, we want them to stay a little bit away. The only other person here is the tank. So it's me and the other tank, basically. Just guarantee that this stack doesn't go on a random DPSer, because that's kind of where you can get into the weird situations of like, you have 3 people with this debuff, and now it's very easy to accidentally step on another person and stack up that raid-wide dot, right? So 5 to 6 stacks we found to be the kind of sweet spot here. On Heroic, there's some ads to deal with. I can try and fast forward later on when we are dealing with the ads. But basically, it's from this Dispel here. We have 2 players with it. And basically, going to go off of them, and this is going to spawn an ad. So whenever this happens, we just drag the boss over to the ad and cleave it. Once we have more than 1 ad, we tend to just mass Dispel in the middle of the room here. Right, so that's going to mass Dispel in the middle, and then we just drag boss on top, and we get some AoE if the boss wasn't dead, and we're getting a new boss. And then this last guy's got the heal orbs. You can see the timer for there. Basically, he's going to shoot out this ball here, and someone has to play goalie. Maybe that's the tank. We're actually behind us. There it is. So someone has to play goalie. You don't want this to touch the boss. Tank job, mobile range job, whatever. Just keep the ball away from the guy, and then don't be in this deep breath I'm talking about. This is the kind of situation, right, where like I'm at 3 stacks. Co-tank's at 0. So if I was at like 6 or 7 stacks, I'd be in a little bit of danger here because there's no way for me to actually clear these stacks. So just be aware of situations like that. Then we're going to get in the same situation where like we're going to spawn ads in the middle of the room here in a second with the mass dispel, and we'll just bring the boss right on top of it for cleave. Pretty straightforward, but I actually really like this tank debuff. This is a really cool tank debuff iteration. Love stuff like this, so hopefully they do more stuff like it in the future. That brings us to Zskarn, and I'm going to apologize in advance. This is the boss fight where my weakors and bigwigs decided to freak out, and so we're going to get a bit of a spaceship UI here. There's a lot of overlap. I'm apologizing in advance. But this is kind of a step up in terms of stuff tanks have to do here. So first, we've got a stacking Fire Dot on the boss, just on autos here, Searing Claws, and this 10 stacks-ish is we found to be kind of like the spot around 10 stacks, not like a hard 10 stacks, because that's not the only thing you have to deal with, right? And this does last 20 seconds, so you do have to kind of give it time to fall off here. But the other thing we have to deal with are bombs, and that's coming in 10 seconds. So let's fast forward. You can see here, bombs are about to spawn. The bar's in the wrong spot, but whatever. So we have 3 bombs that spawned here on heroic, 2 on normal, and basically these bombs will wipe you if you don't soak them within 30 seconds. And so what you kind of have to do here is you either have to commit an immunity from another player or just tank runs into them because they deal a massive physical hit with a 8-second dot. And so what's going to happen here is positioning wise, we found that usually having the active tank just insta-soak this close one, if there was a close one, is really nice, and that frees up your other tank that's not actively tanking the boss to run away and soak the further ones. Now, we just did a tank swap here, which is why that didn't happen. But you have 30 seconds, right? So technically one tank can just do it. You don't want to kind of chain that dot over and over again. So you kind of want to make sure that you're letting the dot fall off before soaking another bomb. And like I said, very large physical hit. You probably want to pop something before soaking it, but things like immunities like Turtle, things like Bubble or Bop do work because it's a physical hit, so be aware of that. You can maybe get away with using an immunity. As you can see, my bigwigs is breaking here. This is only going to get worse over the course of the fight. So you're managing now the tank debuff, you're managing now soaking these bombs, but that's not it here because the Dragonfire traps are also based on boss positioning. So where you tank the boss is very important. We're actually not quite in the right spot here. And you're going to see. So basically, he will always spawn some traps adjacent to where he is, guaranteed, and then the others are a little random. And so basically, what you can do is you can kind of tank the boss over on the edge here to guarantee that the edge 2 of these, I guess, scales, traps, or whatever, are activated. Where we're tanking now, it could be any of like these 4 traps because we're tanking like right in the middle. These are all adjacent to the boss, but if you had slid the boss in here, you could force these 2 basically to be the adjacent traps, and it would always spawn on those, and that lets you keep the center of the room clear. So learn from our mistakes here. The traps are going to go off at some point, I don't know. And then that lets you control where at least half the spawns are, and then you can use the robot trap clearing things. Not tanks, obviously, your other players, but they can use them to clear anything in the middle of the room. That saves you up a lot of space over the course of this fight. The other thing to be aware of is the tactical destruction here. So you really just need to go across the entire universe. There's an example, actually. There's a timer. Yeah, my timers are fully broken. You can see here, these are going to start flaring up. Moved a little bit, so we want it to be like here, basically, or here, ideally. But you can see the traps are going to start flaring up. There's that flare up. And that means that that's the one that he's chosen to activate, and the one right underneath me. So we start to move preemptively because there's a dot if you don't move fast enough. And see, that wasn't quite on the edge. So we lose a little bit of space, and maybe we have to commit like a Goliath or Golem Orb or whatever to it to clear it. So it's a little not ideal, but it's not the end of the world. Anyway, so he's going to begin the actual big AoE explosion soon. Here it is, Tactical Destruction. So this is always on the nearest statues to him. So it ramps up over the course of the fight, the number. So as soon as that goes out, we know that this one over here, because he shot the fire orb over here, is going to be the one that explodes. So we want to book it to the opposite side of the room here to just avoid that big explosion and make sure no one dies. And basically, we would want to go right to the edge here because he is going to then activate new traps, like I mentioned, and we want those to be on the edge of the room. So you can see the boss over there. I'm over here soaking some orbs, bombs, yep. Bomb duty, bomb duty. This is what we got to do. I bopped here because I knew I'd be very far out of range of the healers. It would be pretty tough. But as you can see, we tried to move over to the edge and spawn those at the edge. Again, our positioning is not super ideal, but it's not the end of the world. But you can be way cleaner with your positioning than we've been. So just keep that in mind. You can force it right on the edges. But there's a lot to balance here for tanks, right? You've got the tank debuff. You see, I was over there running, so tank got up to around 14 stacks, it's going to look like here. Not the end of the world, but just be aware, right? It is sometimes you are going to be a little bit higher stacked, so you need to be aware. Tanks need to get a little love maybe if they're at those higher stack points, but, you know, lot to juggle here, so keep that in mind. Definitely an overall step up in terms of tank difficulty because they've got 2 tank debuffs basically to worry about, as well as some positioning stuff as well. So pretty hard fight, but I'm actually a big fan. It's pretty interesting, I think. That brings us to the second last boss of this video, third last boss of the raid, Magmorax. This guy's got a channeled tank hit that has 3 hits to it. They're all physical hits, and each physical hit applies a dot. The boss will move mid-combo if you want to, but that's unnecessary because this combo happens more than more frequently than the length of the debuff. The 30-second debuff, it happens like 20-ish seconds. So it's incinerating maws here. It's going to come out, basically just eat all 3 hits and then taunt swap there. Don't want to taunt mid-combo. On top of that, this lava here, you never want it to touch the boss. That's usually not a tank thing though. As you can see, basically throughout this video, we're keeping the boss totally stationary and we're going to spawn things outside of the boss's range. Keep that in mind. You know, lava puddles can be soaked by anyone, including the off tank here. I'm gonna run out and soak this lava puddle. You can't get to like 25 stacks or something on like heroic difficulty, so keep that in mind. But it'll expire relatively quickly, as you can see. There's also some other soaks that come out here in a second that will go out. These ones, again, tanks can pretty easily soak this. It puts like a 1 minute long debuff on you that makes you take extra damage, but it's not very much. Both the initial hit and it's like a 150% damage amp. It's not a lot. You can basically ignore it because it doesn't stack. So if there's one of the tanks, just soak it. Otherwise, not too much to tanking this fight. It's pretty simple. It's essentially a taunt at 1 and just don't get knocked back into the lava here. It's going to happen in a few seconds. So, you know, you can lock gate that. You can, you know, Death Advance for your DK, charge, or leap, or whatever if you're one of those classes. You can bubble or bop, as you can see I did there as a paladin. So you have quite a few different ways to not be knocked back. And again, if you don't have one of those ways, you've got the lock gate there as well. Otherwise, pretty straightforward. You know, soak things if you're the off tank as well, or even the current tank. As you see here, I'm going to back up right into this. The boss moved like an inch. It's not a big deal. We tank this on the side here of the platform just to give us more room for those lava puddles to spread out like near us, and then the rest of the raid just kind of stacked for healing. Very, very simple tank fight, honestly. Not too much to it. And that brings us to Neltharion, probably the hardest hitting boss when it comes to melee swing. So this guy's got very, very big melee swings, which kind of plays into his tank debuff that happens in the first phase, Calamitous Strike. This is also a big physical hit. It has a massive knockback, but it also has a 40-second amp, 200% physical damage taken amp to the tank. So that's pretty scary in terms of when you have to start tanking the boss again, because you'll swap, but then this will happen again before your debuff falls off, and so you'll be tanking the boss for a little bit with that damage amp, kind of similar to Rashok, where you were sometimes tanking her with that Electric Jaws debuff. Similar idea here. Now, what you want to do with this Calamitous Strike is you want to make sure you open up space for your move here, because there's going to be a big AoE at some point. This fissure spawn going to be a big AoE that you need to move away from to the next area so that you have room to spread for these debuffs on heroic and just in general just safety for that and spread with the lines as well. So you're going to see here, I'm going to get aimed directly behind us into the wall behind us so we have space to move. It's a little finicky, as you can see there, like I got here and then I got shifted and then it broke. So I accidentally broke 2 walls, and why that's not ideal is because of the stacking dot here. It's actually a raid dot. It goes on the entire raid, but it's not the end of the world. 2 stacks is relatively low. 2 stacks is actually kind of chill. So you're aiming there to get as few stacks as possible while still breaking a hole in the wall, of course, and no one else wants to break holes in the wall. So we're running through now. On heroic, of course, this does rebuild in a second. I don't remember if it did on normal, but on heroic, this is going to rebuild. So everyone wants to make through. There's the rebuild. And now we're going to do a similar thing here, but with the other tank, of course. And you're going to see, right, he's going to Calamitous Strike soon. And my debuff isn't gone yet. So he's going to get striked, and he's going to open up this spot right behind us. And then I'm going to be tanking the boss here with my debuff for a melee or two. It's probably one. Yeah, boom, boom. 2 melees. 2 melees and I almost died. So beware of that. Very, very hard hitting. Make sure you have something up for when you have to taunt this boss off. And the other thing is positioning wise, I should have been a little bit more over here. I should have brought this guy a little bit over here, because you're going to actually see we're going to be crunched for space in this next area, because he's going to drop his fissure a little too close to the next area. That's on me. You want to make sure you bring that boss. I moved a little early because I got messed up with my timings. Having that overlap would be very nice, because you can see now the edge of this is actually in our next area. I'm not going to say quadrant. I was going to area. It's in our area now, which is not ideal, because of course we want to use it for space to spread, that kind of stuff. And so it's a little annoying that we weren't far enough away from our spot. So keep that in mind, and see it grows a little bit there as well. So not ideal for sure. Make sure you give yourself enough space. Tanking the boss like right next to the previous puddle, or as close to as you can, while obviously still being in the segment that you're in, is ideal. But then we push into the next phase here, and the big difference here is that on normal, you can just drag the boss right on top of the ads because they're available, but on heroic, your mind-controlled players kind of need to break it through like a shield initially, and then they pop out, and you can kill them. So initially, you actually want to tank away from where the ad is positioned, because no one can deal damage to it, and just cleaving the boss there is just going to murder your mind-controlled players. So you're going to see here this little like intermission dance thing. And the ads are going to spawn. I think it's going to spawn like right behind us. Yeah, right here. You can see it's not killable. And then you see a bunch of corrupted players. So what's going to happen is we're going to keep the boss right here. Corrupted players are going to go and DPS this guy down. So that way we're not accidentally cleaving those players with all of our AoE ability or any ability that would spread, ignite, that kind of thing, right? That would be bad. And they're going to go over there. All these pets are going to make things confusing. And as soon as they actually break out the shield, that's when the boss will be tanked over on top of the ad, so that we can cleave it down, because that's when they will no longer be mind controlled and everyone can hit the ad. Now, Sunder Shadow is the tank debuff in this phase. So what this is another big physical hit that then separates your soul from your body, which allows you to run through walls. And what you can do with that, as you're going to see here, I'm going to get sundered, and I'm going to position myself so that I can break through to the next area here, because the next ad is right behind me now. I'm going to break this wall here. And again, notice I moved. If I had break like right here, that would have broken like 3 or 4 walls. That's still 4 stacks of a dot, right? You want to not break many walls, as few walls as possible. So I move a little bit so that this is just going to break ideally a single wall here. Make sure you aren't hugging the wall either. It can be a little finicky. Your spirit, or your body rather, is going to teleport straight to your spirit. And you need to have a bit of space, so just back up a little bit from the wall here. And then the Shadow Strike is going to go off. This is going to deal magic damage based on missing health. So the higher your health, the less damage you're taking there. And then as you can see here, a single segment was broken by my body getting shot through the wall. And now we have space to run over to the next ad once we've actually cleared it. So there, the ad broke out just now, and we're all going to start moving over towards the ad there. And we're going to cleave them down. And then as soon as this ad is dead, there's now a hole to the next ad that we can go through. And you just kind of repeat from there. Cleave this ad down, cleave this ad down. There's a Shadow Strike. You're bringing the boss over. Again, you have a damage amp in this phase. And same idea. See, we're tanking way over here at the start of the phase. The mind-controlled guys are over on the ad. We don't want to cleave them down. I'm going to get my tank debuff at some point, or I'm going to bring them over because they broke the shield. Then the tank debuff goes out, and I break the next area as they're killing that ad. And then we can go to the third and final ad. And then that brings us to E3, which has the tank debuff from the first phase again. There's the dying. So you have the tank debuff from the first phase again, that physical one with the big knockback and physical damage amp. So be aware of that. The other thing you're going to see spawn are these rifts. And this is the main important thing of this area. So you want to try and soak as many rifts as possible when he does his it's called Big Bang here on the thing, his roar attack. These ads here on heroic, they gain a 75% damage increase every 2 seconds. So the more of them that there are and the longer they're alive, the more dangerous it is for your tanks. These guys deal a ton of damage on heroic. Very, very scary for sure. And you get less of them if you soak these portals for the Big Bang. So You can have 2 people in the same portal for when that ability goes out, but if you spread out and soak as many portals as possible, you'll get less of these ad spawns, which means it's less likely for your tank to get murdered by them, because these guys are pretty dangerous here. So you can see how much my health is getting chunked here. I'm taking both the boss and those guys, and now I have the physical debuff as well. Luckily, these guys died, but I think I am going to die to the next set of ads because I still have that physical tank debuff, right? And they're just autoing into it with their damage increase. Super scary for sure. But here's the Ebb and Destruction. We're going to try and spread out to as many of these as possible. Again, there's a couple of us in this one. That's actually fine. You're not going to die. It's not like Ragallon, if you guys remember that fight back in Shadowlands. It's not mandatory 1 person per portal on normal or heroic. But you will have more ads if you don't spread out, because more portals will be up. You're right. We're going to get rid of a bunch of portals, but there's still going to be like 5 or 4 over here, a couple over here. So you're still going to get a bit of ads. And then you also have that physical tank debuff. So ideally here, your tank that doesn't have the debuff is trying to pick up these ads, because it's pretty scary. They basically just auto for physical damage, right? Big physical amp, not ideal for sure. To make it a little easier, you can maybe tank the boss kind of closer to wherever he spawns. These portals is going to spawn like a bunch more from these rocks down in the corner here, so we can move the boss over here so that for the next roar we could be soaking those and melee could still have good uptime, that kind of thing. But overall, definitely the hardest tank fight, I think, in terms of damage output on the tank out of all the boss fights up to Sarkareth, which kind of makes sense seeing as it is the second last boss. But there we have it, guys. My tank tips for the first 8 bosses of Abberus on normal and heroic difficulty. Hopefully you found it useful, and if you did, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like it, including that heroic Sarkareth guide coming out soon, as well as mythic boss guides as well. If you have any questions about any of these bosses, do leave those down in the comments below. And don't forget, I do stream all of my personal progression and keep pushing over on my Twitch at Tactics, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have there. Well, of course, thank you to all my supporters over on Patreon. It really does mean a lot. And thank you all so much for watching as well. Enjoy Season 2, and I'll see you in the next video.